Hi, and welcome to Decoding AQ, helping you to learn the tools, mindsets, and actions to thrive in an ever-changing world. Hi, and welcome to our next episode of Decoding AQ. With me this morning, I have Donna Karlin. She's from Ottawa in Canada. She's the CEO and founder at No Ceiling, Just Sky Institute. So welcome, Donna.
Thank you so much. I'm pleased to be here.
So starting your career as a coach to long-term care patients and families of terminally ill cancer kids in the 80s and 90s. I mean, wow, what a way to start a working career. You're also a global speaker, a TED Fellows coach, and an author, and a prolific creator. So you've created the shadow coaching methodology and taught it around the world. But where I'd love to start, Donna, is I'd like to know a bit more about the impact on your career as a result of your son's surgeon. Could you tell me a little bit more about that story, please?
She was a dynamo and a tough cookie. Like, people used to warn me about her own fellows and people that worked with her said, I don't know how you get along with her so well. I need to know how, because she was very tough. And she had a really difficult start as a female in a world of innovation. My son was the first patient in the world operated on for his kind of paralysis, and it was experimental to the nth degree. There was no second opinion anywhere in the world. There was one surgeon in France who could do a slight bit of the work that needed to be done on Michael, and he wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole. That's exactly what he told us. And what was interesting was after his first surgery, he was 5 months old. And he needed a lot of care afterwards. The surgery was 18 hours long to a good part of his body. So, as an infant, he couldn't crawl. He needed me to be around. What was really fascinating was that was totally experimental. And when she figured out what to do next, because we sort of worked together through the stages of the surgeries that he had. And she looked at me when he was about 2 years old. She had moved from Canada to United States. We had to go follow her there. And she looked at me and she said, you will be working with all my future patients. Now, at this point, my degree was in music performance. I had worked with the National Arts Center Orchestra. I had to give up my position to take care of Michael. It was a full-time job. And as you probably would guess, being in an orchestra is not a 9-to-5 job, so that it just wasn't compatible. And I looked at her and I said, I have enough on my plate. I mean, I was going to the hospital every day with him for retraining and therapy and everything else, and post-op care. And she looked at me, and excuse the expression, because this is a direct quote from her, like all 4'10" of her, you will not piss off the surgeon, will have a scalpel over your son in an hour. And I said to her, I have to go back to school. Like, I can't just start working with your patients. Why do you want me to do that? She said, I have never seen a parent, or anyone for that matter, deal with a patient like the way you are. Because what she saw was that I was helping him become responsible for himself, even at 2. Anything that he could do on his own, I didn't do for him. And that continued as he had subsequent surgeries. I mean, he had 18 surgeries over the first 19 years of his life. That was very staged. And I realized if I was going to work with her microsurgical research center and all patients from around the world with very different kinds of paralysis and what have you, I needed to have some kind of educational background. So I did go back to school, and I kept studying whatever was out there, because in those days, coaching didn't exist. I was working, actually observing her patients in the waiting room. We would be there 12 hours minimum. No, even longer, 8 a.m. till midnight most of the time, till they did everything they needed to do pre-op. So I was able to observe the other patients and realize that they were telling the doctor what they thought she wanted to hear. And the fears were astronomical, because you didn't know what the outcome was going to be. Like, it could be the difference in a child between being a quadriplegic or a paraplegic, which doesn't seem like much, but it is a lot in the life of somebody. And so I realized that regular coaching and being responsible for yourself and everything I was doing with my son wasn't enough. So I went back to school and I kept studying and I kept studying. And I decided that I needed to look at how a person is hardwired in a way, and how they approach things, and how they look at fear head on, or they let it totally destroy them. And to work with the fear and their thought process, and exactly what it is that they do to make the critical decisions that they needed to make. And that's where the shadow coaching started formulating in my mind. It was, part Jungian shadow, which is your fears and insecurities to your hidden potential, and combined with coaching. And then I went for a pilot program that finally came through. That was a combination between executive coaching and organizational psychology. And I went for a master's program in org psych with a focus in executive coaching to bring them both together. And then I added the healthcare, the behavior, and everything else, and started formulating my own program at that point.
What an amazing, first couple of minutes of just to capture elements. And I sat listening, and I had physical embodied sensations as you were talking there, of just the realization of trying to even just hear what you're saying, of a life experience of how a mother is faced with their child and an experimental surgery. Like you said, that there's no second opinion. And at that point, I just want to pick through a few bits that resonated with me there, Donna. At that point where you were faced with that decision and going with that experimental option, what was your mindset at that point? I don't want to put any words into your mind at the moment, but what was your state at that very early stage?
So for me, we saw the head of neurology at the Children's Hospital here when Michael was 3 weeks old, and they did testing on him. And he said, there's absolutely no nerve conductivity. You're going to have to sign a release to have radical amputations done. And I pretty much looked at him and told him exactly where he could go, picked my son up and left, because there was no way I was having my kid cut up like that at 3 weeks of age without investigating. I said, is there surgery possible? He said, no, too dangerous, would have to take place right outside the spinal cord in an infant. It's just, forget it. It's not going to be done. He will get infections. He won't recognize, his brain doesn't recognize certain parts of his body. And we need to do it now, so he grows up like that. And I went home and I called my brother, who was a surgeon, and I said, find somebody, do something. And he started calling around until he found this fellow that was doing experimental work for nerve reattachment and nerve transfer from other parts of the body to enervate paralysis in adults at that point. And I was willing to try something, as long as it wasn't life-threatening. I was willing to try something if she was willing to give it a shot. And for me, it was like, it was life-changing for him, because he would be whole. Now, that's not to say if he needed eventually to have the amputations or whatever, I wouldn't be there for him 100% and help him, figure out how to have the richest life possible. The point was, don't tell me nothing is possible. It just might not have been invented yet. And that's exactly what she did. She said, I reattached a severed leg after a train accident. This is different. This is 14 nerves that have been damaged or destroyed. And, that's a whole different ball game. So I was looking at what is possible, not what was impossible. It was extremely emotionally devastating, because you have a kid, you check all fingers, all toes, that kind of thing. They weren't all moving. And you wonder, like, what's going on here? It's a shock to the system. And I had to give up my career of my lifetime. I mean, that was my dream, was to be a percussionist. Well, that's the only thing I could do when you can't breathe into an instrument, in a world-class orchestra. And I was there. I had to give that up and deal with Michael. And I realized I could look at what is possible or be angry at what life dealt me. And I decided to go to what's possible. What could I give him that will give him his best life. And that was where I was coming from.
It's often the situations in life where we faced our greatest moments of challenge that breakthroughs happen in all areas. I remember listening to a couple of very interesting ladies. One, Mary Lou Jepson. I don't know if you've ever come across her. Similar kind of threads in terms of her daughter having a very rare condition and science not being able to deal with it yet. What do you do? And that that domino being set off sent many other things in motion. A bit like for you, that event setting off a trajectory for you and your family to serve in a new way, of how that shows up. And it's interesting. Give us an idea of date, roughly when this was happening and going on for surgery, because in medical science, obviously, we progress, and now there are lots of things that we read about and hear, from spinal cords being reattached in mice that were paralyzed using stem cells, or cutting the optical nerve and being able to regrow things. So we're seeing lots of stuff in emerging bits now, but when were we when you were taking this story?
So he was born October 1980.
Okay.
His first surgery was March 1981. It took her 3 months to map out what she could possibly do and then tell me it's going to be a crapshoot. I don't know what I'm going to find when I go in there, because his nerve conductivity test showed nothing. It showed no conductivity whatsoever. So she was going to be doing grafts and moving nerves from other places of his body, which is very fine work, as you could imagine. So she said, I'll go in for 3 hours, see what I could find. 15 hours later, she comes out and says, okay, I'm on track. I'm going to go for another 3 hours. And I'm sort of looking at the ceiling going, this is like he's an infant, right, at this point. And then his subsequent surgery started. 2 years later, he had a surgery. Then there was a hiatus because he needed to be retrained, because his brain didn't recognize the fact that nerves from the right side of his body were going to the left side. So in order for his left side to recognize there were nerves, he had to move his right side. And it was very confusing. So I'd say to him, like, make like a chicken, and he would start, pumping his arm and the other hand would open. Like, it was just hysterical. We had a lot of laughs with this.
Yeah.
So there was a lot. His last surgery was in the 90s. And literally, he had 7 surgeries because he had a massive infection, which killed most of the surgical reconstruction that she did. So he went from having a lot of movement to nothing. Like, he's now back to square one, except he has sensation and his brain recognizes, his left side of the body. So, he's intact, but he doesn't have complete movement anymore. Like, he got it and lost it. And that was the end. He was, at this point, he's about to go to university, and there was nothing that they could, no spare body parts kind of thing to work with. So it was working with the trauma of loss after all this work and all the years of rehab. There is a lot, and he's on top of everything. Every time there's a TED Talk about that. Interestingly enough, a colleague of mine called me out of the blue when Christopher Reeve had his accident and was in a wheelchair. He said, I need you to call your doctor to see if she could help him. And I'm going, seriously? So I called her because I was coaching her at the time, actually. And I said to her, could you help him? She says, no pressure or anything. I'm actually working on what it's like to build an external spine.
Wow.
But I don't think he'll be around long enough for it. And I don't know where they're at with that, but he's looking, because, he always says, if there's an accident and I can't use my right side, I'm screwed. So he's always looking at what are the options out there, and you never know. You just never know.
As you mentioned just before we hit the record, a life of adaptability. And it's true, I think, that life is a continual adaptation, and our ability distinctly as humans to be able to be adaptable not only physically, but more importantly, mentally, to deal with, and not necessarily to deal, to find the joy in the darkness sometimes. And you mentioned, the chicken movements and finding smiles and finding laughs in the darkness. And I feel life is around those tough moments. It's great when the water's nice, the wind's blowing, and we can sail a nice sea, but it makes us when it's choppy. It makes us when it's hard, when it's challenging. In terms of going from that experience and developing through education, and through observation and through an absolute, commitment to your son and to the other patients, how did and what is shadow coaching methodology? Just tell us a little bit more about the evolution of that and where it applies, and perhaps through a few stories of how it helps. I think would be great, Donna.
I'd be happy to. It's a combination of observational work to see what is, not what the interpretation of the client is telling you, because as you know, stories just keep expanding. And if they're angry and you don't address it right away, the anger just grows and there's judgments made and all that fun stuff. A lot of my work pre-COVID, that is, was done in person. So I would be with my clients through the craziness of their days, like for a series of days ongoing. So I would strategically schedule in based on snapshots of the most critical parts of their work and them within it. So there's that part. And then the second part, which is the deep work, is going into their shadow. So their fears, insecurities, imposter syndrome, everything from that to the hidden potential and that which they've not yet discovered. So, some points in your life, you've done something and you went like, holy mackerel, I can't believe I did that. Or I can't believe that I said that. Or I can't believe that people had that response to me. And they're just blown away at something that they did that was unexpected, that was a hidden talent that just emerged because of circumstance. So I work with the full spectrum of shadow in real time with my clients. With COVID and everything else, it was much harder because people were working from home. So I needed to change the language of my conversations to help them be my witness. And I would have them take me through a situation, not their emotions behind it, what actually happened. Like, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, just give me the facts. We'll deal with your emotions after. I'd never discount emotions, because how they deal with it is what I'm dealing with pretty much. I want to know where it's coming from. And the language they use is an entree for me to see how they're thinking. So, and I'll share a couple of stories with you, because I do weird things like mini labs and all kinds of situational fun. Let's do like play a role game kind of thing. And they just look at me knowing I'm nuts anyway. So that it works really well. And I'd like to share a couple of examples with you, if I may.
Yeah.
So one was working for the first time ever in our government. It was a consortium of multiple government departments coming together to create a plan for the Afghanistan task force. So it was everything from development, defense, like the various departments, because they never create policy together. And it was the first time 5 departments came together to literally create a policy that they would all use in order to deal with what was happening in Afghanistan. And this is when it first started, the conflict and the war. And then they said to me, we want your input on the Afghanistan task force. They were the ones who were going to orchestrate what was happening overseas. And I said, fine. And the person who was putting the team together said to me, what I'd like you to do is help me identify the right personalities, the right traits of the people who are going to be part of this team, and to be there as a sounding board, because there's going to be incredible stress and it's going to be very fast paced. And I said, you're going to move them to a separate building, right? Because there's a double whammy here. You're taking the right people out of various other departments. The ones that are left behind, they're saying, what's wrong with me? I'm second-class citizen. I'm not good enough. So there you go with the shadows and the stories that they start telling themselves. And then the ones that are working at the speed of light and 24/7, they get slowed down by the bureaucracy that's happening in the other building. So we had them moved. And then the second thing was, there was a female that was actually put in charge of this team. And I got a phone call from one of her direct reports saying she's struggling. I mean, she's never been put in this kind of position before, and she's really, really struggling. Help. So I went into the building and I said, what's going on here? And I don't think I'm the right person. I don't know if I'm strong enough. I'm working fast enough. Implications of lives, are on the line and all of this. And I said, could you get your team together first thing in the morning? Like, we're talking 7 a.m. We're going to do a little bit of a lab, and it's not going to take long. I need to get you past this quickly, because we don't have weeks for me to work with people in this kind of situation. So she did. They were more than happy to support her because they really respected her. And we went into this room. I set up a set of chairs in a semicircle and a chair in the middle for her. And you could see when she came to sit down, her body language was closed. You could see the nerves. And I said to the team, your job is to be a witness, so that after this is over, you could support her in every way possible, so she could support you back and have a really strong, movement forward. And she had no idea what I was going to do. So I said, welcome to my apothecary store. And she looks at me, she said, you're what? I said, just, work with me here. Apothecary store. She said, like, with the old jars and all the medicines. I said, that's exactly right. So I said, look around. I want you to look around and see all the jars and what's in them. So I said, if you were to let something go, what do you want to get rid of? And she stopped for a moment. She said, fear. I said, could you look for the jar that says fear? And she's looking at me because there's nothing there, right? And so I said, just look for the jar that says fear and put it down on the table next to you. There was no table there either. So she got up and you could see her looking around, and she grabs this jar, imaginary jar, puts it on the table and goes to sit down. I said, okay, terrific. So you want to get rid of all your fear? She said, yes. I said, so just to be clear, you want to get rid of all your fear? And she said, is this a trick question? I said, no. I just want to make sure that I have it right, that I'm truly listening to what you want to get rid of. She said, I want to get rid of my fear. I said, okay, take the jar, the cover off the jar, toss all your fear in there and slam the cover shut and go put it back on the shelf. So she does the motions, and she's really getting into this, puts it in, slams a jar and puts it back on the shelf. And she picked the same spot that she took it down from, by the way. And then sits down, and her body language is already changing. Her arms are on, the arms of the chair. It's not, they're not crossed in front of her. And she's looking at me with a little grin. I said, okay, what do you want to replace it with? She said, confidence. I said, you know the drill. Go find the jar with confidence and shake it all over you so you're immersed in confidence, and then put the jar back. So she does that, and she's shaking it all over her head. I said, okay, so just to be clear, you wanted to get rid of all your fear and replace it with confidence. She said, yes. I said, how do you feel? She says, actually, strangely enough, more confident. So I said, so let me ask you, you're at a bonfire with a group of friends, and you're cold, and you want to warm up, and you put your hand right in the fire because you have absolutely no fear whatsoever. And she looked at me, and I said, and you're walking down the street, and there's a gang of thugs behind you with knives or guns or whatever else. You don't know to run to safety because you have absolutely no fear. And she said to me, oh my God. And I said, yeah, exactly. So what is this telling you? She said, pay attention to my fear, use it to inform me, but not dictate what I do. I said, bingo. Now go meet with your team and see where you go with this. And that was it. She never looked back. It took all of 10 minutes.
Wow. What a powerful reframe and a paradigm shift, you know, use improv, do it in a public setting, an amount of psychological safety needed within a team to do that, elements of, you know, somatic intelligence, you know, embodied part of how someone's feeling it, because a sensation we have, as you'll know, you know, our nervous system will embody that sensation of fear, and to be paralyzed, you know, to either come up with armament or come up with, you know, disassociation when we face something. But the beautiful subtle shift there of saying the inert element is how you then deal with it for it to be an advantage or disadvantage. You know, is this a paralyzer or a power? And that's the context and the mind. So I love that story. And what I'm interested in is, earlier when you were starting about observation and how you were able to go and be a witness and be able to see it through your eyes. So you will see it as your curiosity, your openness, but still have all of your positive and negative biases of what we all bring. It's incredibly difficult for an individual to do that on themselves. You know, we're faced in work right now where there is many things that are changing on an hourly basis. Some things stay the same, which is cool. We need the beauty of some things staying the same, still want love, still want to feel belonging, still want to serve somebody, elements that are still fundamental. And other things come along, might be the process, might be some of the hows, might be a regulation that comes along and says no or yes to what we did before, might be a bit of science or tech that comes along and says, can do it better, can't do it anymore. To observe ourselves, to witness through ourselves. Can you give us some tips for that? Because I find in a lot of the work that we do, it's really hard to do that self-witness and a self-observation, because we see what we want to see, we hear what we want to hear, and that's led by our own brain. So can you give us a few thoughts or tips about to that might be, if that you think that's something good to do even?
Well, it's always good to do something like that. Actually, one of my most well-received talks was on questions to ask yourself, to be a reflective practitioner. And what are the questions you could ask yourself in the moment to slow you down to the speed of conscious thought and not to react to something. And it was amazing because people were jotting them down, and I keep getting emails from them even after that talk saying, you know, I asked myself that question just the other day and it totally changed my response to something. And these are really powerful questions. It's hard to observe ourselves and to be reflective practitioners. There's no question. There are questions that you can teach yourself to ask yourself in the moment to help you look at things from a different perspective. One is what I'm doing now something my future self will thank me for? I've got a temper. Trust me, I've got a temper. And if I ask myself that question, I'm not going to open my mouth and say something I'm certainly going to regret. I have
in the moment, can we listen to it, you know?
That's it. There's things that we call mink holes. It's a code that I have with my clients. And I know if I ask them, you know, did you just go down and is that your mink hole? And they just shake their heads and they go, yes, that was a mink hole. And others don't know what we're talking about. But because we had discussed the power of a fur-lined rat hole that you dig yourself in really deep, felt so good at the moment, but you know you're going to have to really dig yourself out big time. And you generally dig yourself in deeper before you dig yourself out. So it gets even worse. But, you know, there's all kinds of questions you could ask yourself. What do you really want to see happen here? That's another one. If you want to just lash out and tell somebody how upset you are with them, what do you really want to see happen here? And the question is, could you switch around to the work at hand or the issue at hand rather than where it's coming from and the person it's coming from? And when you're able to ask these key questions, then you're able to recalibrate in a way. It doesn't always work, obviously. You know, I'm going to get angry at things. And I really take issue with, like, there's a lot of coaches in this world who feel and believe that everything could be solved in a coaching conversation. And my response is, that person is entitled to be ticked off. Don't minimize that. They're entitled to be angry. They're entitled to take things personally. You can't take that away from them. You could help them turn it around and fuel positive action based on what I call their pistum when they're pissed off. And that my clients know, I'm going to ask them that question to the point where they're going to start grinning instead of getting angry and say, this is what I'm going to do instead. And it's conscious choice.
It's conscious choice and context. I had two thoughts going in my head. One was how brilliant Inside Out was by Pixar, to help with some of those things of showing that, you know, you need sadness, you need joy, you need anger, you need each of these things. What we need is the ability to decide who's in the driving seat at any given time, and know consciously that interplay and the poetry between those different elements is life with then all of the full spectrum of those things. It's when they show up and they don't help our future self, or they don't even help our today self.
Yeah, present self.
You know,
that's it.
Of those things. And the other thought I had was this. In my book, I wrote one of the chapters. It was going from react to respond. And it's very much what you're just talking about there of adaptation, of being able to, being pissed off is something that's really powerful and good. It's you want to make some change in the world. Is that you want to change you? Do you want to change someone else? Do you want to change a system? Do you want to change, you know, a society, an organization, a culture? What is it that we want to shift that upsets us? I just finished watching a series called The Exchange on Netflix, and it's a dramatization following two ladies in the 80s in Kuwait, and they are the first Kuwaiti females to work at the Kuwait Stock Exchange.
Okay.
And I had to Google a few things to just go, well, how long ago did women actually get the vote in Kuwait, you know? And it was 2005, I think. And this was in the 80s. And of course, we had the massive stock market crash in 87 around the world. And so it's sort of the build up to that, and then that event happening, and all of the challenges of them adapting, you know, of can you even open a bank account as a woman? Well, where's your husband? Where's the cosign for it? You know, can you be trusted with this account? And whilst we might now feel, oh, we know better, well, there's many things we all face in our daily practices and daily work of where it hasn't been done before, or what has been done before is now no longer fit for purpose. You know, the way we've treated certain approaches, certain processes, certain generations, societies needs to shift. And if we weren't pissed off, nothing would change. You know, and
Exactly.
So we need to get an element of that energy, but direct it in a way that isn't destructive unintentionally, because we might want to destruct a, you know, old regime, an old power, an old way. So I'm interested a little bit, because time is going to go so quick because there's so much we can talk about. But you had 15 years working with the TED fellows, working with a lot of the TED speakers. So I am, you know, in awe of, I'm sure, being in the room with many iconic people, talks and faces. And I'm curious as to how did that environment, like you've mentioned before, your environment of what happened in your life shaped your thinking. How did TED and the work you did over those 15 years, that environment perhaps shape your mindset or influence some of your thinking as well, Donna?
I want to adopt each and every one of them that I work with. It's unbelievable. And I keep telling them that. I keep telling Michael that, you know, he's going to have a lot of brothers and sisters because I'm just adopting them all. It's a gift. First of all, I have to tell you, these are amazing women and men who don't take no for an answer. They come up with a project or an idea that is so profound that for me to help them in some instances, because it changes depending on who I'm working with, wrap a business model around it and actually get it going, shift how they get it out to the world and scale it. Whatever it is, I know that they're the ones that are changing the world. They're the ones that are coming up with every kind of idea, every kind of project to address climate and healthcare and everything else, and terrorism even. I mean, they get into the heads of terrorists and see how they could infiltrate community and how to fight from the perspective of the solidness of the community. So in order for me to help them remove the roadblocks and clear the clutter is unbelievable. And in our conversations, the two of us, or if it's a group of us, say, you know, there's a couple of them working on a specific project, we just explode with thoughts and ideas and the what ifs and everything else. It's so different than the traditional coaching. I don't tell them what to do. I don't have a clue about what they're doing. Truthfully, that's not my field. My field is people, how they think, how they're put together, their systems, and the organizational systems that they exist within. It is such a gift to be able to work with these people who want to consciously make a huge difference in the world. That I was given a gift by a colleague of mine when she said, "You will be working with Ted." I seem to be voluntold to do a lot of things in my life, and it all works out, you know. All the fellowship programs that I work with 5 actually, everything from Sundance Institute to TED. And so it's film and how do you get the ideas, and Black women directors and filmmakers, which there's, you know, they have a difficult time in that field. All the different reasons behind why they bring me in to coach them is a learning experience for me, because I learn not only about what they want to do and what they want to implement, but about human nature and how they dance with whatever's thrown at them so that they get it done. And if I help them get it done faster, that to me is exactly why I got into this field in the first place, to help people shine and to make a difference in their world.
Having given lots of talks myself, one of the challenges I find is going from something that makes sense in your own head, right? Because I've lived the experience of all of these things. I know all the shortcuts. I know why I think that way, all of these decisions and this complexity, to then be able to articulate that in a simple fashion. And one that is memorable, one that's inspiring, one that engages, you know, and there's almost so many things that we on a checkbox list can go through. Oh yeah, I've got to do this bit, got to tell a story, got to have some loop backs, you know, and you can get overwhelmed with the craft. And some of the best people I've listened to just feel so natural in the way that they can just bring you into that story. What for you, when you're working with, as you said, just this plethora of talent that have just got wonderful hearts, you know, want to do good in the world, to be heard, and how maybe have you evolved from the first few years to 10 or 15 years on? What were some of the things that you adapted in your approach, or you adapted through those observations that have now become more of your go-to for working with people? Tell us a little bit if there's been anything that was common, things that you did now don't do in helping people when they're articulating their stories.
One thing that stands out for me is that what's really important to you, or seems to be a huge stumbling block for how you got to where you got to, isn't necessarily what's important to the people who are listening to you. So you need to be discerning as to what you share with them and what you don't share with them. And if something that is emotionally attached to you gets in the way, then you're not going to be connecting with every single person in the audience. So when I used to speak about Michael, for example, can you imagine a kid operated on for 80% of his body? Both legs are bandaged from the ankles to the groin. He has a brace on his mid section, a huge airplane splint on his left side, a halo around his head, mobilizing the right arm, and a doctor saying, you can't let him laugh. So if he's going to watch any movies, it's got to be documentaries and movies that will not allow him to laugh, because if he laughs, he will shake and his nerves will be disconnected, because nerves are like threads, right? They're so fine. So I'm telling this to an audience and they're like, oh my God, like I can't imagine a kid like that. I said, okay, now I'm not talking about how I feel, the fact that my kid looks like he was hit by a truck, and how am I supposed to 6-foot tall kid help him maneuver to get in and out of bed and everything else. There's that going on. I'm not sharing this with the audience. And then I go, okay, picture having to get him into a van because he wouldn't fit into a car, to go across the street to Ronald McDonald House after his surgery. And we're walking up the ramp in the back because he couldn't do stairs yet. And as we're walking up, he looks at this play structure because it's for kids, right? And he looks at me and he goes, could I take a shot down the slide? And I lost it. I mean, you see this kid and the entire audience is cracking up, and then they're thinking he's not supposed to laugh, right? So I said, before you look at me and say you're not supposed to let him laugh, what I did was I walked into his hospital room and said, okay, directions from the doctor, you're not allowed to laugh. And he looked at me, he said, seriously? So I said, seriously, so you're going to learn how to laugh silently without moving your body. And we practiced so that when this happened, he was able to laugh, and the doctor's walking across the street ready to kill me. And like the audience is seeing this. They're not seeing the horrificness of my son, like bandaged up to the eyeballs. They're imagining, why would he want to take a shot down the slide? I mean, seriously. And the whole place cracked up. Now, like, that's the connection you make with the audience. What do you want them to hear? What do you want them to remember? And like, what are the alternatives? You can't tell a kid, I guess he was about 16 at the time, not to laugh. I mean, the only thing you have when you're
tell
in that
anybody
kind of
not to laugh? Let alone a kid. Can you tell anybody not to laugh?
Exactly right. Exactly. Especially not me. I mean, we would always find something to laugh about. He got really good at laughing with not shaking his body. So wow. There you go. You know, there's always a way around it if you look for what that is. And they were mesmerized by that story because they could visualize it. So that's the second piece. Can they visualize what it is that you're sharing with them so they're in the story with you? That's the whole thing. So what not to say, and what to say that will touch them in a way that's not so horrific that they're going to want to close down and not think of like a kid with that many incisions and that much, you know, going on. Because I could have embellished that and said, you know, every time I had to take 350 stitches out of his body. I don't want to be talking about that.
Yeah.
I want to be talking about his resilience. That's it.
It's amazing, isn't it, that we, as you mentioned, you know, this view of darkness to find the joy, and to shine a light on that aspect is a choice. It's not saying that the darkness doesn't exist. It's choosing what do we look at and for, remember and share. And the piece, actually the last chapter in my book, I gave the piece about the Monkey King in Kung Fu, and where all the different motions, all the different pieces have a use, have a point at which they are advantageous. And often in work, it can feel like high pressure, that it's got to be serious, that, as you mentioned in the story about the 5 different departments coming together to think about the policies for Afghanistan, really serious stuff. And when lives matter, can we still find a smile and a giggle? You know, and the Monkey King in the face of absolute danger can still be playful. And I wonder, it's very easy to say that. to say, oh, be playful when, you know, death is approaching. And for many companies and many individuals that are facing a, you know, a transition, a shift in what they're doing, a death of a task, a death of a job, a death of a career, to shift that into something that's playful, to shift it into a way in which allows us to wake with a smile without it being a smile with my head in the sand. I acknowledge, I see, but I choose. And I wonder if, as we come to the final bit, I'm so conscious of the time because I'd love to chat with you for many, many hours. The organizations that are facing lots of challenges, what's your kind of vision and advice for how they might approach some of these, maybe for them, things that seem insurmountable, or maybe they've tried a few things and they haven't worked? What would you advise them? How could they prepare well? And how have you observed maybe some that are doing this really well in our society that seems so fast, so unpredictable at the moment? What would you say to that, Donna?
Be yourself to the nth degree. That's the thing. If I mean, people are scared to death about artificial intelligence. They don't understand it. We're going to be replaced. We're going to be replaced. I hear this more often than you could imagine. And they could replace what you do, but not who you are. So to remind them that there is a unique contribution that they make to anything that is only interpreted by a human being at this stage anyway. And to let them be so much of who they are that how they utilize AI or anything else is so unique to them that they will always find their way. They will always find their place. And to really allow them to understand, or to enable them to understand, that there is something that is their unique contribution, their unique perspective, that if you share it in a way that makes sense to people, you will always have a path, always have a job or a way forward that will enable you to realize your passion or what you're absolutely passionate about. I'm not under any illusion that there isn't, and I'm sure like you work in it, that there isn't technologies that coach in some way, shape, or form. There's technologies that do counseling for people who are in crisis. I'm not going to get into that conversation because I have my opinions about all of that. That's not to say, though, that when I make a connection with an individual and they know that everything I do is unique to that individual, and it's not a piece of technology that will sort of assess something based on a series of algorithms, that I am so busy. Every time I say to my husband, I can't even think retirement, not that I want to, because people keep calling because I get results with them, and they find themselves in a place that they weren't in before our work together. So what I'm saying to them is be yourself. Don't try to be somebody else. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, maybe, so that you're constantly learning and growing and asking yourself, what don't I know that I need to know, to completely expand my horizons. My entire career, I've been doing that. And like, I don't just go in and say I have a certification in executive coaching, which I do. That's not the point. If I want to serve my clients, I have executive coaching and org psych, and then organizational behavior, because I decided culture is a critical point in the work that we do. So what is the culture, and how do you shift cultures when it's not healthy? So what are the questions you need to ask yourself? Not the answers that you need, but the questions you need to live by. And you will always continue to morph and shift and adapt to whatever comes your way.
It's that mindset of there is a way, and it might not be something we can see today, but we can ask for help. We can ask ourselves to see different things. And it brings me back to no ceiling, just sky. And that, I think, epitomizes the energy that you have, Donna, to find and seek out pathways for all that you have a opportunity to engage with is looking for how might we do this and what are the right questions. Extremely powerful, extremely powerful. Donna, the last thing that I ask everybody on my podcast is about curiosity, and I'd like to finish it up with that. And it's this question. It's actually two-part. It was, when was the last time you did something for the first time? And part two, and what was it?
When was the last time I did something for the first time?
And what was it?
And what was it? The last time I did something for the first time, I'm just trying to think of what that is. Probably playing with AI. I decided that I wanted to investigate what it was all about and looking at it from multiple angles. It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. Simulations, that kind of thing. And how can I bring that into the work that I do so it complements it, doesn't replace it? So that was this past week, really playing with it, because I finally had a little bit of breathing space to do that. And I'm intrigued.
I love it. Yeah. I think to shift from fear to fact, to go and find and explore in those things. And often it's something very practical that we can put our finger on, and others it's doing the same thing but with new eyes. We in terms of, there's a great quote I can't remember right now, but the opportunity to do something new is just looking at it with new eyes when we do that, and it will show up in many different ways. If people want to get in touch with you, Donna, to reach out, what's the best way of them being able to do that and connect with you? Because I think that many people will be inspired by your work, your views, want to dive into some of your author works. I know you've written for lots of different things, for Forbes, for all sorts over your career. How do they get in touch, Donna?
The best way to really get in touch with me and to see a lot of my posts and how I think is LinkedIn, and it's Karlin with a K, so that people understand that. And my portal site is probably the easiest, donnakarlin.com, and you can get me through there if you have any questions. And I so appreciate this conversation. It was amazing. You are delightful.
Oh,
thank you.
Thank you, Donna. I am just really inspired by your work. I can't wait to continue to learn more about it and help it inspire many others. I thank you deeply for your time and sharing today, and for the connection that we've made, and hopefully we'll have a collaboration and co-elevation for years to come. So thank you, Donna.
Thank you.
Do you have the level of adaptability to survive and thrive the rapid changes ahead? Has your resilience got more comeback than a yo-yo? Do you have the ability to unlearn in order to reskill, upskill and break through? Find out today and uncover your adaptability profile and score, your AQ. Visit AQai.io to gain your personalized report across 15 scientifically validated dimensions of adaptability. For a limited time, enter code PODCAST65 for a complimentary AQME assessment. AQai, transforming the way people, teams, and organizations navigate change. Thank you for listening to this episode of Decoding AQ. Please make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast directory, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Please do leave a review, and be sure to tune in next time for more insights from our amazing guests.